And welcome to all of you joining us from across the globe. Yes, that's how big this is. I know people are staying up. Johnny, we pulled Johnny in. Johnny's over in Japan. I think it's around midnight there. So I'll start there, Johnny. We got Johnny from Cinema 5D. We will have some other people joining us. We have Mike Bubolo from Sony, and we have Sony Artisan Adventure, Man of the World, Educator. I could just keep going and going and going. Chris Burkard, how's it going, man?
How you doing? I'm honored. I'm honored to be here. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Johnny, as well. Like I said, we're going to have some other people jumping in, but we all know why we're here right now. Obviously, if you haven't heard, if you've been living under a rock, Sony just did announce the A7S III. Mike, if you could just tell everybody a brief intro on yourself and get us started on this powerhouse camera.
Sure, yeah, and it's been no secret. It's the first time Sony's ever had a countdown to a product launch, so there's been a ton of buzz, ton of excitement for the last 5 years, almost every day. People like Derek, people like Chris have been asking me, "Where's the Alpha 7S Mark III?" And I always told them, I was like, "We're working on it. We want to make the best possible camera for you. It just takes some time, and we don't have the technology yet. When it happens, though, it'll be the best product you can ever imagine." And that's where we're at, where we have a no compromise camera that's purpose built for that professional videographer, that's purpose built to give you the best image quality. And that's what this camera is, where you're going to have a brand new sensor that gives you the best 4K quality that you can have, 4K 120p full HD 240 frames per second, and no compromises. So 10-bit 422 for all of them, with all intra recording internally for all of them. So we're going to be able to have the best ISO performance of any camera ever made, the highest dynamic range at over 15 stops, which is insane. And then of course all the functionality and all the durability and reliability things, where we have the best heatsink of any ILC camera out there, where we have almost unlimited record times, where your battery and your memory card dies before the camera overheats. Dual CF Express Type A cards. I mean, the camera is just a powerhouse. Everything that a professional needs to rely on a tool is here, where we have faster readout speeds, so you have almost no rolling shutter. Just, I mean, the list goes on, and I can geek out all day. So, but that's really it. It's just a no compromise, the best possible video capture device that you can have in the ILC world. And I'm proud to see my new camera.
Well, Bubalo,
Good
we know
work.
nobody geeks out like you, and that's why we have you here because we want the full geek out. The people demand specs, they demand all that nerdy stuff that goes into the camera. Now, Chris, I'm
Yeah.
guessing you've had your hands on this thing for a long enough to get a good impression of it. You first get it. I know you had you shoot with the A7S II. What's your first
Yeah.
impression when you get your hands on the new, say, A7S III?
It's so challenging because the A7S II, it changed my career. And I really mean that in the realest of ways. I shot a film about surfing under the Northern Lights. I mean, we pushed that camera to the edge and then some. And what I mean by that is, like, at that point, nobody had actually shot the A7S II at super high ISO and then put it on a large screen, like a movie theater. And we did that. We screened this film all over the world, shooting these, actual movement, under the Northern Lights, filmed in real time at ISO 24,000, 30,000, et cetera, et cetera. So when this camera came out, my expectations were like, this better be good. And I mean, the reality was it performed on all levels. And I didn't go and just test it in a controlled environment. I wanted to test it out in the field. I wanted to get it wet. I wanted to get it cold. I wanted to be in harsh environments. And that's exactly what we did. I went to Alaska, to Wrangell St. Elias National Park, and I tested it out in these ice caves, water's dripping on the camera, shooting ISO 10,000, filming, getting photos, stills, really trying to allow this camera to expand upon that creativity that I think each photographer, director, or cinematographer wants, right? You want the ability to be able to be unencumbered and allow that movement to be really organic. And that's what it did. And then also on the other side of that, testing the slow motion capabilities by shooting 120 frames a second, et cetera, out of a plane, filming another plane, side by side, right? You're in a tight environment, it's swaying back and forth. You couldn't even, put a large Venice in there or something like that. You need this tiny camera articulating screen. So I tried to create a scenario where I would give this thing the full gamut of what it could do, and it performed beautifully. And I've said this before, but there's a line in the film that we just watched where I'm like, all I want to do is go back to the places I've been and reimagine the shot. And I truly, that's how I feel. Like this thing has set a new bar. And so to be able to look at all your work thinking from a new eye, from a new perspective, like what could I do now? That's really special.
You know, I never would have thought of putting Chris Burkard and controlled setting in the same sentence. So I think Sony knew. They said, who can we get that's not gonna, you know, just throw up a beach ball and be able to bash it over the left field wall? And it's like, if anybody's gonna take this thing and put it to the screws, it's gonna be Chris Burkard. He's broadcasting right now from a van in the middle of New Mexico. So
exactly.
we can vouch that there is definitely no controlled settings. I don't think you know what a controlled setting is, Chris. You shoot all over. If anybody's going to get the most out of what they're given and what nature can throw at you, it's going to be you.
Well, it's all about harsh conditions. As photographers and creatives, every person that's tested this camera, we're looking for, it's that moment after the storm, right? It's when the light's really dark, and the dynamic range is a real hero. I mean, we'll get into this later, but being able to use that dynamic range and have it be usable through the ISO range is crazy. I mean, we want to bring back those highlights, those darks. Like, this is what I think people are forgetting, is that it's all the settings aside, that's excellent, but being able to preserve the detail, preserve the quality, and thus preserve the emotion of a scene through dynamic range is really important.
Definitely. I mean, you want a camera that performs. It performs and gets out of the way. It lets you do what you have to do creatively. And now, Johnnie, I know we talked before we went live today about you have a process when you're reviewing a camera. If you could just take us a little bit into that process. When you get your hands on new gear, what kind of tests are you putting it through?
Yeah, so it goes like this. I mean, we touch a lot of cameras, different sizes, different manufacturers, different types. And of course, each camera has its own kind of identity, and it's always about the right tool for the job. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and the way I try to test the cameras under the Cinema 5D roof is actually conduct short documentaries, because this is the way for me to really get to know the camera. Going out and just waving it, it's useless in many ways. Yeah. So we're in a very good position here. Or actually, we are very lucky to get those cameras. And the first thing that I do when I get a camera, I don't open the box. I let the camera stay for one day, and I want the camera to feel like at home. I know it sounds strange, but I don't want the camera to feel like I'm abusing it in any way. Yeah. So there's a process. Opening the camera, the kids will look at it, and then they will paint it, and then they will go probably, oh, another camera. Okay, what's the difference? They all looks the same. Yeah. But in the case of Sony, of course, everybody were waiting for this camera, and I have to say that in Sony Japan, they are very, very kind people, very nice people, and I was kind of a bit ambushed in the sense of that I was testing before this new, was it 12-24 millimeter lens. I did a very nice story about a monk actually here in the neighborhood, and I simply went back to give back the lens, and it was kind of, here is the lens, and the answer was no, keep it. Maybe you will need it. Need it for what? I'm done. And it was, I kind of just finished to test the lens with the A7 III, and then the next thing was we have the A7S III here to show you. And I have to say, and again, in a very open, honest way, when I first saw the camera, I was a little bit, concerned, because when you see, I mean, it's a full frame, really great, 4K, okay, and then of course it's like 10-bit and all the other goodies, but then you ask yourself, especially that you know what the competitors are doing, is it enough? Is it enough to compete in today's very violent market? Yeah. And when I left that building after 3 or 4 hours of presentation, I wasn't so sure. I thought that actually Sony created the camera of today and not the camera of tomorrow. This is in all honesty, yeah. But within the time of having the camera, I got other cameras from other manufacturers, and I actually learned to work and enjoy the camera, in the sense that this is a tool that actually, the tool is working for me. I'm not working for the tool. I don't have to think too much in the sense, will it overheat? Will it do this or that, shutdown, whatever? The tool is working for me. And the other thing that I really, and this, I wrote it in the article that I published earlier, and this is something that I do appreciate, and I have to salute Sony. There's a certain race for resolution. And there's a certain race for internal raw recording. Yeah. And of course, when it's not there, you go like, oh, what's going on? But Sony, and one of the things they always did throughout those years, they pumped in all the time this exceed expectations sentence. And this is something that when I saw the camera, I was trying to compare, is it exceeding my expectations? Mm. So at the beginning, when I saw it first, it didn't. But then I got it. It took me, I'm a bit an old guy. It took me some time, but I got to the point that Sony chose to exceed expectations, not in the resolution and not in the internal raw recording. They decided to exceed expectations with reliability, ease of use, and robustness. And I think for that, they did really a great job. And I'm not working for Sony. I'm working with Sony sometimes. We test a lot of cameras, but this one, and yeah, it's a camera which is simply very easy to use, and you know that you can rely on it. It's simple as that. And this is without doing any promotion to the camera, because I think it's very important at the end of the day that people will evaluate for themselves and will test for themselves. No, it's not a matter of just throwing almost $4,000 here, and I'm saying throwing like that, yeah. And I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm just saying, for me, it worked quite well for testing it. I was very impressed. Of course, there were some technical issues which I reported back to Sony, but that's because it's a pre-production model. But other than that, it's almost like a boring story, boring in the positive way.
It's too good. It's like when a product is too good, and you have a company that pays attention to what its buyers and its market wants. And Johnny, now I realize why all my pictures are horrible, because I'm the guy that is walking out of B&H and posting up on a mailbox outside and opening the box. So I don't give it any time. I guess I don't give it that time to bring it home and get adapted. Bubolo. So we've got some firsthand experience from two people who have used the camera. Let's talk specs. Let's talk, when we talk about this robustness that Johnny's talking about, this ease of use, what's maybe the first thing that's going to stand out as far as from an upgrade or a modification standpoint? So somebody who had the 2 gets their hands on the 3, or is maybe coming from another Alpha camera. When they get their hands on it, when they start playing around with it, what's going to be the first thing that's going to jump out that's different?
I think, to Johnny's point, one of the first things that's going to jump out is that it's the same exact size as an Alpha 7R Mark IV. It's the same exact size as an Alpha 9 Mark II. And to Chris's point, we were all expecting a camera with a fan. We were all expecting this bigger camera to be able to be capable of doing all these things, but we didn't make a compromise in making it bigger. We didn't make a compromise in making it a larger product. So we have it being the same size, but yet we're able to incorporate that heat sink that incorporates the entire inside of the camera. And it's important to realize, again, this camera literally, even though it looks the same and it has the same physical features of those cameras, it's completely redesigned from the inside out, including even the materials on the outside of the camera, because heat was one of the #1 things we wanted to eliminate and be able to, no pun intended, but to be able to give you the best possible heatsink in a camera without having a fan. Because once you add a fan, it's no longer dust and moisture resistant. It creates noise. So when you use the XLRs and the microphone on the camera itself, it could possibly create noise. So again, we wanted to just make sure that every single thing was done without compromise, and just make it, to your point, make it just feel like an extension of yourself. Make the hardware do the work for you, so you can just concentrate on the important things like creating, like filming. We just wanted to make a product that works in every single format, and without you having to think about it or worry about it. And that's everything from the autofocus all the way to the image quality, the battery life, the overheating, everything. It just does its job, and it does it perfectly. And it gives you image quality that you normally would only see on really high-end cinema cameras and high ENG cameras. So I was really impressed with what Johnny said. I mean, it's my sentiments exactly. Just the camera does its job and it does it extremely well without compromise. And that's one of the first, I think that's the overall perspective of the camera when people are using it. It just changes the way that you shoot, not just because of the high ISOs, not just because of the dynamic range, but also you're always worrying about the camera and manipulating the camera to do the things you want it to do. And it just takes away, it takes you out of the moment. And now the camera just does its job. So, but when it comes to physically, I mean, the camera, we're all used to it. So you're just, I mean, the first thing that you're going to see, we all press the menu first, and we'll get into this, but the menu's being different. So it takes you back for a second. But other than that, physically, the camera's the same. It looks great, feels great. It's awesome. And you're just impressed with something this small and this light and the things that it can do.
Now, you mentioned the menu, and of course, everybody, it's such a, it doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. It doesn't have anything to do with the power of the camera, but the menu is how you navigate, how easy. We talk again about ease of use, and a camera that when you're out and you're on the go and on the fly, you want a menu that's intuitive. What changes have been made to the menu? And Chris, if you could talk about, I mean, you got your hands on it, obviously having a host of other Sony cameras. What was different in the menu to you? I mean, was this something that it was a learning curve because it's a new menu or a new layout, or is it something that it was so easy?
Great question. Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, I think one of the considerations, Derek, is that this was the unsung hero of the camera, of the device. And I know this is like, you know, we're getting into the weeds here with the nerdiness, right? Like, oh, the menu and the screen, but to be honest, like, those are the features that make sense. Like as a director, as a photographer, when I want to put the camera on the ground and get this ground level perspective, I can flip the screen up and I can access the menu through the screen. Like that's totally new. That was never an option. So now that's a new shot that I can get. And again, I'm really here to be the creative. I'm here to focus on the creative, the use case. That's what I'm here to talk about. Putting it up in the window of a car, shooting back, or in the window of a plane, shooting backwards, not having to set it up and hope that the framing is good. That was huge. I've tested almost every camera that Sony's come out with in the last 5 years. I know these menus well. And to be honest, at first I was like, oh no, a new menu. This sucks. I was a little worried. And then all of a sudden I dive into it and I'm like, this is way more intuitive, right? Like my picture profiles are right there. My video settings, but adding a custom menu was like really easy. And that was actually a huge help. And again, coming from a film background, like I get it, you know, the simplicity and the beauty of a camera, but nowadays that's not the reality. Like we're using digital cameras. They have a host of options. Those options are all great things, but if they're confusing and if they inhibit the creative process, and that's really what I want to say. I want to say anything that inhibits the creative process is really challenging, right? And ultimately, everybody here mentioned it, you know, Johnny and Mike, everything is that when you are able to free yourself, sort of extract yourself from that learning curve, from that like really challenging use case. I mean, this camera felt really intuitive to me, and that's what I loved. I mean, also too, putting a camera in a water housing, putting it with a lot of other third-party accessories that I use, whether it's tripod mounts, it wasn't any bigger, and I was really concerned about that, right? It fit in my hand just like the R4, and that was actually a huge advantage. Okay, like this is something I'm comfortable with, it's something I'm used to. It was a step in the right direction, and I would say that just to kind of reiterate, the screen was my unsung hero, right? I was like, you know, I'm pretty short, you know, so being able to put a camera above my head and shoot and look down at the screen was amazing, right? Being able to put it on the ground. I love tripods, they're great, but it's like a ball and chain sometimes, and we drag them around with us. And being able to shoot at ISO, you know, 4 or 5, you know, 10, 20,000, it's kind of how I tested it. And rely upon the quality was huge. And I just want to say one more thing. I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but
go for it.
I got my first print back from the S3 testing it against the R4, which is my go-to commercial camera. It's my landscape camera. And I really wanted to see, how does this thing hold up, you know, and I was blown away. Like I printed my most common print size, you know, 16 by 24, high ISO. The color was gorgeous. Like that was a really special and unique thing for me to be able to really see that real life comparison, because in the end, that's what it comes down to. Like you're a photographer, you're trying to either make a living or share the beauty of the world. And if it can't perform the way you need it to, it doesn't make sense, right? It's why we're using cameras and not just our phones, right? Because photos are meant to live on places more than just social media.
Chris, you actually took my next question out of my mouth, because I know that A7R4 is your commercial workhorse.
Yes.
But the A7S II has its spot in your kit. So without saying, this is my Chris Burkard, go out and do this, recommendation for somebody who says, hey, what would make me want to upgrade to this camera? Where does this camera fit into somebody's kit? In your experience with this camera, maybe one thing that jumped out and you're like, hey, this makes it totally a camera for this.
I would just say that, to first understand that the R4 for me, it's that high-end commercial photography camera or high-end landscape. It's like, if you're not printing photos with the R4, you're doing it a disservice, right? And it might be a little too much camera for you, and I'm a big fan of, like, I don't need a Lamborghini. What I need is something fast with good gas mileage, and that's what this camera is. Like, it's the no compromise video camera. And it's also the incredibly powerful stills camera that for 90% of the situations I'm in is going to be great. And then there's this other kind of X factor, which is high ISO stills, which I really love to shoot. I love to shoot Northern Lights. I love to shoot the Milky Way. Astrophotography is super fun and a real passion of mine. And this camera unlocks the opportunity. So I would say personally, like, if I was a newbie, if I was somebody who wanted to shoot a little video and I wanted to shoot stills, but I wasn't going to be blowing them up billboard size, the S3 is really where I would lean into. Prior to that, I would say the A7 III was kind of like the all around, workhorse, great budget camera, good ISO range, all these things. But nowadays, I would say that in my kit, I'm always going to have usually two cameras, the S3, the R4, that's it. There's, for me, the A9, those things are more specific. I don't need them as much, but this is like my no compromise kit.
Chris, so you had no issue with 12 megapixel for photos? I'm asking for professional work.
I personally have not. I haven't blown this up to a billboard size. So much of what I think, it's all about that use case, of course. And there's a fine line between, if I'm shooting something that's high ISO and I need to, it's at night, or the client wants low light, I would rather shoot the 12 megapixels. And I think you mentioned it, Johnny, really well. Like, there's a megapixel race. And the reality is, what good are megapixels if they are not fully used, if the dynamic range is not fully there? And I guess that's the big difference that I've seen, is like, I was printing images on the S2, shot at ISO 24,000 up to like a 20 by 30, 40 by 60, right? Obviously there's a little post processing in there. There's some noise reduction, of course, that's par for the course. But with this new camera, I obviously haven't even been able to print a ton of work, but I did get one sample, and I was blown away. I could see no visible difference shooting, at this certain print size between the R4 and this. Now, there's always going to be compromises, and that's kind of the beauty of the world that we live in. But I'm really excited to be able to use it and know that it can perform.
Now, Bubolo, let's talk battery life. Is there any changes to the battery? Has anything been modified?
Well, we've been spoiled with the Alpha 7R Mark IV and the new Z series battery. So I kind of always forget that the Alpha 7S Mark II still use the W series battery. So we're getting 60% better battery life than what it replaces, the Alpha 7S Mark II. But we're still getting we're getting about 600 still images, which is the SEPA standard, which is old standard. So you can still get thousands of pictures in stills off of a battery, and you're going to get about 90 minutes or more on video as well, at 4K 60p. So the battery life is incredible. So, and especially when you compare it to the W series battery, that's a whole different story. So
I was just going to say, like I know that Sony doesn't want us to say anything negative about it, but the reality was the S2 battery, that thing left a lot to be desired. I'm sure, Johnny, you've experienced it, and everybody else, but I mean, when I'd go shoot at night in the Arctic, I'd be having these batteries in a pouch next to my chest to stay warm, or like I would attach, I've had like workshops where I've talked about how to preserve the battery life, And it was such a vein of my existence. It was a thorn in my side because I would bring 10, 15 batteries to shoot a time lapse or whatever that was, or through the night. And this new battery life was incredible. And I tried to test it in some harsh conditions. Again, like I'm over the Bagley ice field, camera out the window of the plane. When you add wind chill, we're talking like -40, right? And so I'm shooting this thing, we're filming, we're also shooting a lot of stills sequences. And so that was that made a big difference to me. That's a huge advantage.
And beyond just the battery, we have the new USB-C port, which is able, we've always had USB-C charging, but the camera would the power would be lost in the camera faster than the camera's charging. But now with the new USB-C port, the camera will actually charge faster than the battery discharges. So if you have a strong enough USB port or a brick, you'll be able to charge and keep the camera powered unlimited. So you'll never have to worry about ever changing out your battery. And that's huge for time lapses, like Chris said, or when you have your camera on a rig, not ever having to take that battery out and being able to charge it via USB-C is pretty incredible.
And that's the little things. Like Chris was talking earlier, it's like stuff, you know, even the vari-angle LCD. It's like you may not use it a lot of the time, but that time you need to use it. And the same with being able with the USB-C port with the battery. It's the stuff that you may not think of. Everybody thinks processor, autofocus, IBIS. Nobody thinks about the little things. So when, you know, you do have a company like Sony that's thinking about the little things for you and incorporating that into their upgrades, you know, it really comes in to save the day when you least expect it.
Yeah. When we talk about little things, you know what is my favorite feature? Please don't laugh at me. When you want to focus and you using your joystick, there is this just a square in the middle, which can usually either gray or white. And sometimes you simply don't see this. It takes you this extra second to see this, but in the A7S III, you can change it to red. And that helped me a lot. I mean, it's just so much easier to see this, especially it's the rainy season now in Japan. A lot of gray, it's gray, it's simply gray. So when you look for this a square gray on gray, it's never easy. But that's one of the things that I thought really well done.
That's something really, I would never think of.
Yeah, that's a funny point, Johnny, because I'm actually colorblind, and so it's hard to see that little gray. I like the fact that I can change that color a lot. The more contrast, the better. Yeah.
Chris, you put in a word with Sony. You said, "Hey, guys, come on."
Well, that's a funny point, though, Derek. I mean, I'm sure I like what Johnny said, where he's like, you know, I gave them feedback, and you know, the camera had like some firmware updates, probably in the pre-production model. The reality is, they actually take your feedback, and I'm this isn't like a plug or a pat on the back for them, but I've sat with the engineers and I've told them this is what I need. I told them I want a wide angle night lens that says, I mean, and then the 12-24 came out magically. Like, these aren't just things that I think that people sitting behind cubicles or sitting behind desks are creating. That they actually take the feedback of the artisans, of the Alpha Collective, and they apply it. And I just, that is the #1 reason that I work with this brand, because they actually apply the feedback. And I've asked them, like, why isn't this camera coming out? And again, as Mike said, it's like the technology wasn't there. Simple enough. They're not like hiding something for a good time to make the biggest buck. It's like they need to be able to obviously compete with everything everybody else is making and improve upon it. And so I really respect that and appreciate the feedback loop has been really amazing. Almost everything I've ever addressed has always been accommodated. It's really, really nice.
So I guess the difference between us, they never listen to me. Maybe you can talk to them about the internal ND filter. You know, maybe next time they will listen to you.
That's the one thing I'm like, I dream of that, but you know, I know it's gonna happen. So,
Johnny, I think next time you have to call Chris on three-way. That's how you're gonna get your questions plugged in. Now, Bubolo, I'm an autofocus guy. I know everybody has their thing. When you get a new camera, when a new camera comes out, you have some people that are all sensor, some people that are all autofocus, some people want ergonomics. Can you tell us a little bit about the autofocusing system?
Yeah, so one thing the S has never really been known for is autofocus, right? So the Alpha 7S Mark II is contrast autofocus, and it had a lot of compromises, especially in those 5 years. We've created the Alpha 7 Mark III, the Alpha 7R Mark III, 4, the 9 series. So we've gotten accustomed to the world's fast autofocus. So when we picked up and used the Alpha 7S Mark II, we were like, I forgot, it's not the best autofocusing camera. So we really wanted to, again, make the autofocusing on this camera the best that we've ever created in an alpha camera. So we have 759 autofocusing points, but more importantly, it focuses down to -6 EV in almost every shooting mode without really any compromises. And you're able to do things like pupil autofocus. That's actually 30% better than what we've had before. You're able to do subject tracking with all of our AI combined into the camera. And it's not just a phase detection on the sensor that enables it to be a really good focusing system, but it's also that new Bion's XR processing engine that's able to just process all that data really fast and give you the best results. And again, it just changes. You don't have to, as videographers, when you think of autofocus, most of them are not really adapted to autofocus because it's never been 100% reliable. And to be able to have the autofocusing system and the speed of an Alpha 9, of an Alpha 7R Mark IV gives us the ability to track the pupil of an eyeball as it's coming at you at 25, 30 miles an hour. Or I can be walking and the subject can be walking and I can be shooting at 1.8 and track that pupil. I can just touch the screen and focus on a moving subject moving at 80 miles an hour across the screen and be able to track it wherever it goes. So again, the camera will just be an extension of yourself. You don't have to think about and manipulate the camera to autofocus. The camera will actually do it for you, and it's something that you can really trust and really and really work with in your own creative process, both for video and for stills. And it just works, and it just works really well, and probably the best I've ever seen in a camera, not just for video but for stills at the same time. And beyond that, lots of little things in the camera, so we made it just not focus as quick as possible and do things as fast as possible, but for those video creators, we've made now 7 different steps in terms of how it shifts from one subject to the next. So I can touch one subject and then touch the other subject, and it'll give you this really nice smooth rack focus, and I can change that to 7 different speeds, so I can make it as quick or as slow as I want. Or I can also change the steadfastness, so if I select one subject, if it moves towards another subject, I can keep it still on the other subject even if it's all the way on the edge of the screen, because I can change those settings. So there's really a lot of creativity in the camera and a lot of manipulatability and personalization in the camera that not only makes it really fast, but makes it really smooth and really cinematic in a way. So it's a really awesome focusing system.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on that rack focusing through the screen. Johnny, is that anything you used? Are you a touch screen guy?
I'm not a touch screen guy because it's very hard for me to work in daylight with open screen. I'm usually working handheld, and I really need the viewfinder, the EVF, as another touch point. I really like it to see what's going on. And as such, I don't use a lot the LCD screen, unless, I guess I'm like Chris, this is just an illusion. We all look down into the camera, but in reality, we are not that high, that tall. I'm really, if I don't need the LCD screen, I will not use it. So autofocus, I do use it a lot. And actually, I use it a lot almost to prove a point, in the sense of, for so many professionals, it's a complete no-go. The same as mirrorless cameras, yeah. And the world is changing. And if the tool is reliable enough, there is no reason why not to use it. And mirrorless cameras in general, they're not 100% easy to use because it's not a professional camera, but it's getting there. And if the autofocus now is functioning well, and that's one of those cameras that it is functioning well, there's no reason why not to use it. And part of the test, part of the review is, of course, to try how it's working, especially when you're following people and so on. So as I said, I had a slight issues with the autofocus, which is legit. Yeah, that was a pre-production model. I'm very, very curious to see how it will translate into the final model. And this one we're going to get soon in order to put it in our lab and test the dynamic range and the rolling shutter effect, which we haven't talked about it yet, but this is really, I think, at least for the eye, yeah, it's one of the best, if not the best mirrorless camera when it comes to controlling the rolling shutter effect. It just really very well maintained and controlled. So yeah, so I am an autofocus guy, and I'm not ashamed or shy to say this. Yeah, it doesn't make me a less good professional or whatever. Actually, the end customer couldn't care less if it is in focus and I manage to take the shot that I want.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're ever gonna have a client ask if you what mode you shot it in or what kind of autofocus you used. It's like, hey,
But
did you zone focus that?
yeah, I think though, like in the video world, it's like a taboo subject. Like, oh, you're this the autofocus. Now we're talking about autofocus. Well, this camera is a gimmick, right? And I can only say that, the reality here is it's not so much that it has this incredibly fast autofocus, adapted from the A9. It's the smoothness of which the subjects come into play. And I remember being in an ice cave, and we're filming this shot where we're along the ice cave wall, like the blue corner of the wall, and we're allowing the autofocus with the touchscreen thing to just rack focus smoothly, and that was never something I've been able to have happen. It's always jumping from subject to subject, and you're always like, I'm just going to manually rack this thing myself. I was impressed. Obviously my job was to test out this thing and try to push it to the point, and it is for me the best that I've used, and I was really impressed. And just being able to have that option is really powerful. Obviously, it's never going to compensate for having a third party or somebody out there racking focus for you, this and that. But when you're that one man show or one woman show, and you're out there and you're shooting by yourself, or you're using this tight svelte camera in a compact environment, like, that's amazing. And I actually, to be honest, I didn't even know you could set 7 different speed settings. Like, that's incredible. That's where it almost gets overwhelming, where I'm like, man, there's so many options, there's so much to learn. But when you need to really dial it in with pinpoint accuracy, that's incredible. I mean, what a cool advance in technology.
And it works in every mode too. So like it's not normal that cameras can do that same level of autofocus at 4K 120p and 4K even 60p. A lot of cameras lose autofocus in these certain modes. But again, that no compromise mantra of this camera, meaning that you're going to have that autofocus everywhere at all times, and whatever setting you want, you just set it and forget it. And you don't have to think about, oh, do I have this setting and then I have to handicap this? Do I have to lose image quality so I can do this? Right. But you're going to get that autofocus now, even at 4K 120p and full HD at 240, which is something that's not really been done before. So,
and Mike, I want you to stay geeking out for a minute here. The processor, what are we looking at processor wise? I'm guessing we went faster.
Yeah, so this is one of the things where we didn't have the technology yet. So we didn't just create a processor. We now have this new Bions XR processing engine, which is multiple processors, multiple front-end LSIs, integrated features that is 8 times faster than what we've ever had before. And it enables us to do the things that this camera can do. It enables us to do the artificial intelligence and subject tracking and autofocus while doing 120 frames per second at 1200 megabits per second. It enables us to do the 16-bit raw output while recording 4K 120 all-I internally. It enables us to do everything that we want to do. And like I said before, this camera is brand new from the ground up. Everything in the camera is brand new, and this processing engine is really like the foundation for alpha to come. It's the foundation for Sony imaging products to come, because it is that powerful, and it is able to unleash and do things that we just never thought we'd be able to do before. So it is where the sensor's the heart of the camera. This is really the brains of the camera, and allows us to do all the things that we can do.
And when you think Sony cameras, when you think these alphas, the A9, the R4, the A7S III, everyone wants to think low light. We keep talking about high ISO, low light. When you look at Chris's work, you can't help but think, astrophotography, wide, low light. But you don't think colors right away, right? Everybody says Sony, low light, video, bam, bam. Those are the first 2 things that come out of their mouth. Now, what you guys did with this, you matched the FX9 and the Venice cameras. So Johnnie, color-wise, I mean, I know our guy Doug got his hands on it, and one of the things that he mentioned was that the colors had a pop, but it was a natural pop. It was a nice, smooth pop to the colors. Is there anything you noticed on the colors of this camera?
Sorry, we're talking about colors in high ISO or just in general?
No, colors in general. I think a lot of people look to the high ISO capabilities, and they look to the video, and colors kind of get lost in the mix when we talk about these.
Well, color-wise, I think what I do appreciate that Sony actually now they're really matching when you work in S-Log, because before it was kind of all over the place. If you would try to match it to a professional Sony camera, it wouldn't be really one-on-one. So I think now really much closer, and in S-Log 3 almost much easier to grade, of course. What I would love to see is even a tighter integration between some of the picture profiles that, let's say, the FX9 has, and maybe implement them in the A7S III, because there is no reason why not to. If this is going to be a big camera, both full frames camera, I think it can be done. I think Sony also have, I think it's 7, I didn't really count, but they're like out of the box creative colors, which I think some will appreciate if you need really, really fast, good picture. And, you know, if you're doing news and there is no time to really grade. But yeah, now that it's a 10-bit camera, of course, working with S-Log 3, it makes much more sense. And S-Log 3, for me personally, is much easier to grade than S-Log 2. And I was really, really happy with what I saw. Yeah, it's a matter of taste. You know, at the end of the day, Sony was always more into the bluish side than other manufacturers. And I think it has also something to, which is quite interesting, maybe because living here in Japan, you can also see that there is some tendency to like the more bluish color. Also, they really like his 60p. Yeah, it's not, when we're looking about cinematic, the Japanese are more into the fluid picture. And also when they watch television and when they watch movies, they do, the processor to smooth the 24p is working hard in order to make it again very smooth. Yeah, but maybe that's a matter of culture. That's what they like. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think that the colors are more refined. They're nicer.
Chris, what did you notice color-wise?
Yeah, you know, I was just gonna say, Johnny, that's a great note. It would be really awesome in the future to be able to kind of match those color profiles that, you know, the PP1, PP2 to other, you know, higher end Sony cameras. Because for me, you know, let's dive into like documentary filmmaking. I use the Venice actually quite a bit on shoots, and I'll tell you one thing: there's never a shoot I've been on where I've had like an FS9 or an FS something and a smaller DSLR or a smaller mirrorless camera, right? Like the S2. You always have both, right? Whether one's a backup camera or whether it's BTS or whether you're shooting it for these tight scenarios. So I love the ability to match the color profile, and obviously shooting in these flatter profiles for kind of the people who aren't familiar with them, you know, shooting in the flatter profiles allows you a more kind of a raw, extracted look where you can go in and really, really color process better. To me, I felt like the newer profiles still had some vibrancy to them, which I really liked. Sometimes it's hard when you're shooting something that is supposed to be so dynamic and so interesting and it just looks so flat. But I love the idea of being able to know, and this is the first I've realized of it from, you know, from what you guys said, was that actually the color profiles are really set more to match like the higher end, the Venice, these proper cinema cameras. Because when you're grading it, you want it all to feel seamless. You don't want to have like a transition like, oh, well, that's obviously the mirrorless camera. This is obviously the higher end camera, because you are mixing like 6K, 8K footage with 4K, this and that. So that's really huge to me. I would say that, you know, obviously what I look for oftentimes is I tend to look for kind of fall off, like color fall off or chromatic aberration, things like that within those higher ISOs. And I didn't see any. And when I printed it, that was what I was looking for. I edited the image just like I would edit an A4 image, or sorry, an A7R4 image, with the same process, and I didn't see, oh, I'm pushing it too hard, the photo's falling apart at the pixels, right? And that was really impressive to me. Granted, if I get into like the, you know, a 6-foot print for a gallery wall, you're going to start to notice some things if you're shooting high ISO. But at least for me, I don't want to have my cameras be specific to like, oh, well, I got to process these ones like this and these ones like this. That was really important to me. So.
Yeah. And that's really, oh yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mike. Go.
And it's important because when we think of high ISOs, everyone just thinks grain, and the actual noise. So it wasn't just the noise that we really wanted to make better. It was the color reproduction at the high ISOs and the detail at high ISOs, because something that's always separated really high-end cameras like the Venice, like the FX9, is that their high ISO performance gave them really beautiful colors, gave them really beautiful details, where the ILC cameras and the interchangeable mirrorless cameras that we've had have kind of fallen apart. Part of that's for 10-bit, part of that is just because of the processing, and part of it is just because of the color science. But we're lucky to be a huge imaging company where, in these 5 years, we've come out with a full frame FX9, we've come out with a full frame Venice, and those engineers that created those products have helped us in the color science and the color theory on these products, so we can get the best possible colors, because we know that this is going to be, like the world's best B cam for a Venice, and it'll work hand in hand with an FX9. And to be able to match those colors seamlessly makes your job a lot easier. It makes editing a lot easier. It just, of course, I hear Johnny's point to the matching the profiles exactly. But for now, with just the S-Log3 and having the same color space and the same color reproduction is just pretty humongous, and it just enables your work to just be more seamless and creative.
Now, Mike, did Sony make any changes to? We talked about the menu changing, but we talked about the size staying the same. As far as mode dials, buttons, the ergonomics of the camera, is there any slight changes to that?
There's a couple little changes. So there's the larger record button on the top of the camera now, that you can actually, it's just larger, and it's actually got a red ring around it, so it's just easier to access. Other than that, the outside of the camera is relatively the same, besides obviously the LCD screen. One thing we did add is that usually goes unnoticed, but if you look at the front of the camera, there's a little white dot. And what that does is that it's actually a separate white balance meter. So in video and in stills, we just wanted to get the best possible white balance metering that you've ever had inside of a camera. And that's another thing that usually is separated high-end cinema cameras and video cameras, because of their white balance metering. So we have a separate meter now that gives you really nice seamless transitions while you're shooting video that are also very, very accurate and very customizable. So other than that, the outside of the camera is almost identical to an Alpha 7R Mark IV.
Yeah.
Which is a great advantage.
Yeah.
Because you can run with a pre-production model and nobody will ever suspect that you're running with the A7S III.
That's true. Just don't flip that screen out. You'll be good.
Yeah, the record button being bigger is really helpful for having gloves on. Okay, so I mean, when you're shooting in cold environments, which is a lot of the world, and you're shooting in low light, right, which is usually nighttime or morning, it's colder, right? You have gloves on. This has always been a struggle for me, is trying to navigate anything with a glove on. So being able to know and feel in the night or in the darkness or in low light, like that's the record button, is really helpful. It's larger, it's more pronounced.
Yeah, I'm beginning to think the engineers had Chris back in the lab for 6 months, picking his brain on this.
I gave some feedback for
5
sure.
years.
I gave some feedback for sure. A couple sessions. Yeah.
Hey, that's what we want to see. It's like you said before, you want to know that companies are listening to the people who are going to have this in their hands and need it to make high quality images. Now, Johnny, you talked earlier about you shoot handheld. First thing I'm going to think is IBIS. Everybody wants to know about IBIS. For those handheld shooters, it's pretty critical at times. So what did you notice about the IBIS on this camera?
I want to separate the one mode, of course, will be optical and digital, like the sensor itself with the help of digital. I think it's the active mode, if I'm not mistaken, that's the name. There's a certain crop when you use it, but it served me very well. That means when it's static shots, it literally look like you're working from a tripod. So no issue whatsoever here. When you follow someone, I have to say that there are better IBIS systems in the market. That's my feeling. I'm not saying that this is a bad one, because when I work in documentary, I don't want any gimbals. I actually don't use gimbals because I want this kind of balance between fluidity and roughness. Yeah, if it's not documentary and you need a certain thing, smooth thing, that's a different thing. But here, and I'm not, again, it's very important to listen to what I said, in the sense, I'm not saying it's bad in any way. It's very good, but there are better in the market that can perform in a smoother way when you walk. But all in all, I think it's the best that Sony created so far. So this camera is a new beginning from many, many ways, and I think it can only get better.
Chris, do you use IBIS a lot? I mean, is that something where it's really plays a factor in your photography and filmmaking?
Not as much, but definitely for me, it's more about like again, I'm usually not so much following that subject, like that close scenario, and trying to, the idea sometimes of cropping in feels sacrilegious when you have such a beautiful sensor. But I definitely understand, and I love the fact that that feature is there. A lot of times the DPs I'm working with, they will want to use that for a shot here or there, and being able to have it internally in the camera is excellent. As Johnny said, I mean, I'm positive there's probably out there are systems that might functional smoother. I think being able to have this within all the other feature sets, to me, is a great addition. I personally tend to rely upon, you know, a higher, you know, bit rate, higher output, just, you know, a better resolution, being able to kind of push in or crop or smooth it that way. That's usually the approach I would take anyway, is using a third party to kind of create that aftermarket, I guess you could say, smoothness if I needed to, or most of the time I'm operating with a gimbal or something along those lines.
Yeah, and
Okay.
the stabilizer, it's the first time we've done the active mode, and it's fully optical. So we're still, even though there's that slight crop, you're still maintaining full width of 4K output. So you're not
Yeah.
cropping any pixels beyond what the full 4K resolution of the 12 megapixel sensor, which is nice. So that being said, it does give you that real stable, that active mode does give you the stability, all while being optical. And it just gives you a nice smooth look. And of course, the 5-stop stabilization in the camera for still images is similar to what you find on our Alpha 7R Mark IV and Alpha 9 Mark II. So it's a good system.
And while we're talking output, 16-bit RAW external recording.
Crazy.
Am I correct?
That's wild.
It's great technology when the camera is ahead of what's even able to record to.
Yeah.
So I mean, is that a big thing for you, Chris? I know some people, it's like that's what they geek out over.
It's funny because I tend to be in the director's seat, and I tend to be working with really excitable DPs and editors and whatnot. And I think it's project by project, right? That's the key thing here, is like, we live in a world where sometimes we're shooting the Sony Venice and it's going on Instagram or something like that, right? It's like, why are we shooting, 6K? So I think the reality is, yes, when I'm working on something where output is everything and it's going to be on a movie theater screen or something like that, I'm really looking for that. Also, the color like that you can get out of that is incredible. It's really amazing. So I feel like oftentimes I'm not as concerned, because it's all about that high-end use case, and I really try to work backwards on the projects I'm doing. Where is this going to live? Where is this going to go to? Who is it going to be seen by? And then kind of extract it from there. So the ability, again, there are features on this camera I will never use that for somebody else are going to be like the game changer. For me, it's kind of one of those scenarios where I'm looking at quality, I'm looking at what compromises were made. The fact that we didn't have to put a big fan in there and thus make it less weather sealed is huge. I mean, I dripped water all over this thing. I mean, I know that Sony's not coming out saying this is our best weather sealed camera in the world, but just so you know, I dropped an A7S II into a lake off of a tripod, and I brought the thing out and I let it dry out, and it worked great. The S3, I luckily have not done that yet, but I know that what conditions I did use it in, it was beat up. I mean, we're talking like water's dripping off of the cave of this ice cave, and I was able to have it, on the shutter button. Things where in the past, like with the original A7, that would have shut the camera down. So to me, that's a big component of it, right? Where are you willing to take the camera? That is the biggest question anybody should ask themselves. Like, the truth of the matter is, that old adage, that old thought that the best camera is the one you have with you, that's not true. That's not true. It's the best camera is the one you're willing to pull out, right? The best camera is the one that it's not too big and sitting at the bottom of your backpack that you're like, well, this is beautiful, but this is going to take me 10 minutes to get this thing out. So for me, the form factor, the size, the usability, these are the heroes, because if you're willing to use it and you're willing to shoot it, just like you'd be willing to pull this out, that's really what changes the game and allows you to get those moments that somebody else wouldn't. And so that's, I mean, again, if I'm shooting a feature doc, I'm going to use the Venice. That's what I want to use. But if I'm shooting something where I need that like low light, that intimate space, like this is my go-to. And also too, that the fact that it can create incredible stills is a huge advantage for me.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Sony took all the pieces from all over and really put them into it. You have a fully capable camera where, yeah, this one might outshine the little one here, but this is going to be better for this. And it's kind of just that all around, you know, Chris, I love what you said about the camera that you want to pull out and use. A camera is only as good as taking it out and actually taking pictures or taking video with it.
Right. Exactly.
Like, I have
Johnnie.
a question.
Yeah.
May I?
Go for
because
it.
we haven't talked about really low light, which is really insane in this camera. 16,000, ISO 16,000. Something is happening there that makes the images very smooth, and this is not a good ISO sensor. What's happening in 16,000? Maybe you know.
Yeah, you hit 16,000 and the whole thing goes. It like cleans up. It's honestly really weird.
Really? Bubolo, you have an answer for us?
I was hoping you weren't going to call me out because I don't have an answer for you. Yeah.
We never asked.
I'll have to find out. Yeah.
I know everybody's in their screen looking at each other like it's the beginning to the Brady Bunch.
Well,
Yeah,
it's almost like
lost Bubolo. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Bubolo disconnected. Honestly, I same thing, Johnnie. I was like, I'm in there and I'm kind of scrolling through my ISOs, and all of a sudden I hit 16,000. It's just like boom, the whole thing is like smooth and buttery and it looked. I was just like, is this like the native setting? Is this like? It was just really mind blowing, you know. So yeah, I don't know, mystery.
I'll find out for you guys. I'll promise. Yeah.
There we go. We'll find out for the for those who are watching online. We'll find out for the 4 p.m. Q&A. Maybe it's like a cheat code, like you hit like up, up, down, down, A, B, A, B.
It's a Mortal Kombat cheat code for sure.
We didn't talk about card slots yet. It's always like it's like the little brother that always gets left in the corner is card slots. But again, we keep talking about features on this camera that you may not think about, but then when you find out what Sony did with it, you're like, oh yeah. So what did we do on the card slots, Bubolo?
Yeah, so again, sticking on that thread of no compromises, when you have, and we've learned this from our cameras in the past, when you have two card slots that aren't the same speed, you have to automatically, so to speak, handicap the camera or for that slower card slot. Because as professionals, we always want to back up our data, right? We always want to have redundant recording because God forbid something happens to the data on one card, you always have a backup. So we wanted to make two card slots that have the same capabilities. So we have two card slots and each slot's capable of taking the new CF Express Type A, and they can also take SD cards. What's nice about the CF Express Type A is that they're really fast. They're actually smaller than SD cards, much smaller than CF Express Type B, and they're extremely fast, so 800 megabytes per second. So they're more durable, more reliable, faster, and smaller than SD cards. They're just like the super format. They're like a perfect format. And since we have two slots for them, you'll be able to shoot in any format and shoot it redundantly. That being said, when you're in video, a lot of things can be done just to the SD cards. You don't have to get the only thing that you have to shoot to the CF Express Type A is 4K 120p all intra, just because it's 1200 megabits per second being ingested into the sensor and the processor. So it just takes a lot of data and you need the faster card to do it. But most everything else can be done to SD cards. But it's nice, but it helps in things like the buffer, like in stills, you're going to get over 1,000 uncompressed RAW plus JPEGs when using the CF Express. I mean, in my own personal use, I was able to get 1,600, which is more than what I'll ever want to use. But it just shows you the capabilities of having those better, faster cards, and to have no compromises and having two of them really makes just a big difference in terms of that reliability and dependability for that pro shooter. So
can we take a guess that Bubolo, you were also testing out the very angle screen and you took 1,600 selfies? Is that fair to assume that?
I'm just always on selfie mode at all times, just in case you never know when the good angle is. I'm still trying to find that good angle of myself.
Chris, Johnnie, is that something that's big to you guys? Do you look at card slot improvements or modifications as something when you're looking into a new camera body?
Chris, you first.
I mean, slightly, you know, it's something where I think the redundancy is huge for me. Like if I'm shooting on an expedition, there is no data backup that's going to be better than a memory card, right? A small one, right? So this is kind of one of those old tricks, right? Is like, you don't bring a laptop, you don't bring a computer, you're shooting to two at once, or you're backing, and you're just able to have a redundant copy. We were able to test this camera with the newer cards, as well as kind of some of the traditional ones. And I'll tell you what, the card technology gave a massive advancements. It's one of the interesting things about shooting motion, right? Is firmware updates, as well as card technology advancing. It allows to change a lot of things. I mean, bit rates and frame speeds and this and that. So I think it's one of those things that I appreciate the thought that was put into that. It's not something I'm constantly thinking top of mind, but if I am going into shooting a doc or something along those lines, that's absolutely the first thing I'm going to make sure is that I have the highest write speed, highest tech cards that are available.
As far as I'm concerned, and everything that Chris said is absolutely valid, but I really wonder if the implementation of such a card is also looking with one eye into the future. Because if the card is fast enough and the processors are fast enough, maybe new codecs, or you can maybe shoot something on a better quality altogether in the future. So the technology will not be there to stop Sony.
I guess Mike, unless Mike can read the future, I guess we will just have to wait and see, Johnny. We'll see where that card technology takes us in the future.
Like I said, the tech in this camera is going to be the foundation for future cameras to come. So, I mean, beyond that, this new format of memory card and the new processing engine, there's just a lot of tech in this camera that is more than capable, obviously, in this camera, but I think will be capable of embracing the future as well. So.
Definitely. Well, I want to thank you guys for joining us, and to all of our viewers who are watching online and those that got some questions in, thank you as well. I do want to remind you we will be having a Q&A at 4 p.m. Eastern time today. So for those of you who didn't get your questions answered or still had those burning questions, we will be getting to them. I want to thank Sony, our sponsor, of course, Mike Bubolo from Sony, Johnnie from Cinema 5D, and the amazing Chris Burkard. If you guys, Johnnie, tell everybody where they can find more of your work.
Cinema5D.com, together with Nino and my partner, we are managing and running the site together with, I think, over 17 professionals like us who also happen to write well, but nobody's a professional writer. Everybody's a professional in his field. We're running the site in Japanese and also in Spanish. And yeah, it's in all honesty, we have really great people, and I hope that we're doing something to support the community, because our filming community is a very special one, and we really do care about the people and try to do as much as possible. And just very lucky to be in a position that hopefully we can support our audience and the filmmakers community and the manufacturers when the line is very clear. You know, what can be sponsored, what is not sponsored, what is an absolutely unbiased review, and so on. So I hope that we are doing a good job in separating between the commercial side and the absolutely independent side. And thank you very much for having us here.
Awesome, and thank you. And Chris, if you could tell us where we can find and follow your adventures and any projects you have coming up.
Yeah, first I was going to say, Johnnie, your site is amazing, and it's such a great resource for photographers like myself and people who want to learn unbiased reviews. I always really appreciate the honesty you guys bring to the table. For my own work, you can follow me on social media, obviously my website, and if you just simply Google my name, things will pop up. But I'm currently on the road in New Mexico, going to shoot a job tomorrow, and then I actually head to Iceland in about 15 days to do a project for Sony. We're going to be shooting with the S3. As well as the Xperia phone, and we're going to be doing a first ascent bike crossing of the whole country, 900 miles through the harshest environment of the interior. So that will be my next absolute sufferfest, if you could call it, and I'll be trying to share as much as I can on social media. And obviously I love being able to bring people into these stories. So I was going to say, you know, obviously there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of people who want use cases. I've already had friends texting me like, you tested this out right now. So if you have questions, shoot me a direct message or shoot me an email, and I'm always happy to try and share my experience with it, my limited knowledge of the tech as well, you know, and really my use case. So I try to make myself available as a resource if I can to other creatives and photographers. And yeah, and thank you guys for what you do, B&H. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Chris. And look, if you ever want to trade jobs, sure, we could work something out. Nice controlled settings here. If it ever gets too rough out there, I'll take some of those Iceland trips for you.
Perfect.
So thank you again. And if you guys were wondering where you can find Mike Bubolo, I'll tell you, 4 p.m. Guess what? Guess who's got him back here? This guy. Bubolo's coming back at 4 p.m. Eastern time to answer your questions and hopefully some of my questions. Hopefully he's still talking to me after this. But thank you so much again to our sponsor, Sony. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Mike. And we'll catch you guys all at 4 p.m. and we'll be doing a Q&A. See you then.
Thank you.
Okay.